2. Ethical life. Ethical life is the good, right, and freedom fully realized and actual, the fully present kingdom of God on earth, the Jedi Order. It is the unity of right and morality, of subject, the subjective will, and object, the objective will, of inner subjective right and outer objective right. The word ethical in ethical life simply means unity, a self-other unity. That is, anything that lifts you above your ego into your true universal self. It is having absolute unity as your aim, i.e. universality, not particularity, and not remaining as an isolated, lonely, natural ego. The absolutely infinite free will is realized, existent, and embodied in the UPI of the ethical laws and institutions of family, civil society, and the state. As said, freedom and the good have an actual existence only in the subjective, individual will of a family member, entrepreneur, and citizen of a state. And this forever puts the lie to those totalitarian, authoritarian interpretations of Hegel. Indeed, Hegel says not only that, quote, subjectivity is the ground of the existence of the concept of freedom, but that the right of individuals to their particularity is contained in the ethical substantial order. Thus, the good, the idea, is continually being realized in the state, the world, every day by the free will of its citizens, simply by their fulfilling the rights, duties, and roles of the various institutions they participate in. Virtue and the good is simply being in sync with the duties of the circumstances you belong to. Indeed, it is in duty, Hegel says, that the individual finds his liberation. Liberation from dependence on mere natural impulse and from the depression which he cannot escape in his moral reflections on what ought to be and what might be, and liberation from his subjectivity, which remains self-enclosed and devoid of reality. In duty, the individual liberates himself and acquires his true freedom. And note especially that not only institutions, but also laws are reason of my reason, and in obeying them, I am obeying myself, and thus free in the highest sense of the word. Hegel sums this up by saying, quote, ethical life is the living good, the good endowed with knowing and willing, the concept of freedom developed into the existing world and self-consciousness. The ethical substance is the absolute unity of individuality and the universality of freedom, of the particular will with the concept of the will. And it has actuality as the spirit of a people. Each citizen, as thinking intelligence, is aware of the ethical substance as his own essence, and views it, his absolute final end, as something already achieved in the here and now. Yet, he also produces this end by his activity. Thus, without reflective choice, what should I do? Each person fulfills his duty as his own and as something that is, and in this necessity, he has himself and his actual freedom. And the relations of the individual, in the relationships to which the ethical substance particularizes itself, constitute his ethical duties, end quote. Therefore, following the concepts unity, opposition, restored unity, dialectic, we begin with immediacy and the abstract natural unity of the family, then advance to the opposition, division, and relations of civil society, and conclude with a restored concrete unity in the state, the political constitution, and its one all-pervading will. The family. The family, the first phase of ethical life, is the immediate substance of spirit and based on love, spirit's feeling of its own unity. The concept of the family has three moments: marriage, family property and assets, and the education of the children and the dissolution of the family, and the transition to civil society. Note that it is the right of the family as an absolute ethical institution to maintain its existence in the world, which is a right against secession from the family unity. Marriage. Marriage, as the unity of opposites of the two sexes, is monogamous, as it must be an undivided surrender of the personality, and also cannot be consanguineous. The public ceremony is ethical and necessary. It is based on the free consent of the persons, and especially their consent to make themselves one person, and thus renouncing their natural and individual personality to this unity of one with the other. From this point of view, Hegel observes, their union is a self-restriction, but in fact it is their liberation, because in it they attain their substantial self-consciousness, end quote. Also in marriage, the sexual union is changed into a spiritual union, into self-conscious love. Thus, sex is subordinate to the spiritual ethical tie, which has absolute unity as its aim. Even intimacy is subject to chance and transience. Indeed, you are in the marriage as a member, not an independent person. This applies to all the members of the family. Family property and assets. The family has its external reality in property, and since no one in the family is an independent person, no one owns property. Everything is owned in common. Hence, property now comes to have an ethical dimension and interest, as does family income, labor, and providing for the future. Since property belongs to everyone, I see not just myself in the family car, but every member of the family. Also, each member of the family has a right to the common stock, to all property and assets. The education of the children and the dissolution of the family. Marriage is a unity, but in its outward existence, the unity is split into two parties. It is only in their children that the parents' unity and love exists permanently and objectively. The children are the love of the parents in objective form. The parents also have a right over their children and their arbitrary wills, a right which is at the same time their duty to educate them to adulthood, just as the children have a right to be educated and maintained from the family resources. Education results in the second birth of the children, their spiritual birth as independent persons. As Hegel says, education is the art of making people ethical. It considers them as natural beings and shows them the way to a second birth, the way to change their original nature into a second spiritual nature, which, when achieved, the opposition between the natural and the subjective will disappears, and the subject's internal struggle dies away, end quote. Lastly, the logical destiny of the family is its dissolution, which can occur either by the natural death or passing of the parents, or by the children having completed their education to adulthood and freedom, no longer family members, but independent persons. Legal regulations now entering, e.g. regarding the will, estate, and inheritance. And having left the family, they start families of their own. This is the transition to civil society, the moment of opposition and division of the whole into a multiplicity of independent, self-seeking individuals and families, where ethical unity and universality seem to have disappeared. We will continue our study of ethical life next time by taking a look at civil society and the state, the apotheosis of objective spirit. Thank you.